when he kind of went on a rant on LinkedIn against the judge. This was a matter we weren't even involved in, and that blew up in his face as well. So, back to your point, it is real world.
This is the 20-Minute Attorney Business Development Podcast. My name is Toby Steinemann, and here with me to discuss how lawyers use LinkedIn for business development is the man who recently started his journey to become a LinkedIn influencer, Bill Burns.
Well, thanks, Toby. The real story is that I didn't become one of the cool kids until I started hanging out with you. Now, all of a sudden, I'm getting, impressions and friend requests, and you've made me quite popular.
Forced you into a LinkedIn presence, but here you go.
So, Toby, maybe what are some of the basic things about how we can use LinkedIn for business development?
It's always good to, before we start going into the details, to discuss a little bit the surroundings that you meet when you actually enter the LinkedIn environment. I think it's quite important to not forget where we are and how we have to, what kind of conversations and how we meet people on LinkedIn. So I think there are a couple of things that are important here. The first point would be that it is what it is called a social media platform, and the social part is quite important here. So I think we need to pay attention to that. Even though these platforms sometimes feel that they don't have anything to do with real life relationships, or they feel a bit detached and weird in some ways, it's still about relationships. There are real people behind the screen, so you actually have the opportunity and the obligation as well to enter into these conversations with your target audiences. And in terms of having a conversations, there's always two sides to it. So it's not only a one-directional channel where you broadcast your success or your messages in a one direction. It's about listening as well. So I always tell people to think of LinkedIn like a real-time networking situation. So when you go to an event and you have like these coffee break rooms with all these high tables where you have people standing, and LinkedIn is exactly that in a digital environment. So it's an opportunity for you to enter LinkedIn, and there's a lot of conversations already happening at these small tables that you can join, or there are people waiting for you to have a conversation with. So the invitation is there to actually do that. If you enter the room and just stand next to a person and don't say anything, it's in real time, it's a bit weird. On LinkedIn, you probably won't get noticed, but there are still the basic principles of human interaction that apply as well on LinkedIn. For example, if you go to a dinner, you also don't sit there and talk about yourself the whole night. You actually engage in interesting discussions with others.
That's an excellent point to think about, that this is, though it has a strange feel to it sometimes, because it's remote, but it is actual real time.
It is real time, so people will actually appreciate it if you are respectful, if you listen to what they're saying. I think another point that is important that we often forget, especially if we see some of the posts on LinkedIn, is a business platform. And I always encourage, especially lawyers who want to do business development on LinkedIn, to keep it professional and to think about the content they post in a way that it should be interesting to their target audiences in their business context. Thinking about who you want to talk to, put something out there that adds some value in their business context.
I also think it's important to emphasize that, that it's a business platform by thinking about, like, if you're in a firm, when you're on social media, you're representing your firm. Everything that you do is a reflection of the firm. So it's important to also look at the firm's social media policy, which will have a lot of do's and don'ts in terms of how you utilize social media. If you're not in a firm and you're working on your own, there's plenty of social media policies out there on the web that can help guide you to make sure you stay out of trouble. For example, there are a couple of, there are ethical rules that you can easily violate. You can also, there are certain professional standards for advertising, for solicitation, and you have to have those in mind when you're operating on any social media platform, including LinkedIn.
It's not that easy to actually come up with a social media policy. I mean, certain things are clear that you have to put them in there, but then on one hand, you want to make sure that your employees are protected and don't enter into any traps that these social media platforms can provide. On the other hand, as a company, as a law firm, these people are your salespeople, so you want them to be active and promote themselves. So you have to make sure they are encouraged and motivated to do that.
Oh, you're absolutely right, Toby. It is a thin line, and we are constantly reevaluating our social media policy because social media is evolving, so the policy has to
Yeah.
evolve with it.
Yeah.
But one thing you have to be careful about is giving legal advice, and if you are inadvertently creating a lawyer-client relationship. So a lot of things to really be mindful when you're using LinkedIn.
Do you guys make any suggestions or provisions in terms of political statements or any other delicate areas?
Yeah, our advice is to keep it professional, to stay out of politics, to stay out of things that are going to be divisive, because you're using this as a platform to promote yourself, but you're also promoting the firm, and everything that you say is a reflection on the firm.
Very good. So just to conclude here, I think the third and fourth point that I would like to make, and it might seem obvious, but it is a digital platform, so it's good to remember that from time to time, because what it does, it offers you a reach into audiences and that you wouldn't reach without a digital channel. And then number 4 is it's about content. So it's there to share interesting information and interesting stuff. If you want to do business development on LinkedIn, it's basically a requirement that you actually share content. Without content, LinkedIn is difficult to use as a business development method. And
my challenge there is developing interesting posts. So, it's consistent. That's the same challenge the attorneys face. Toby, I have a fifth and a sixth point to add here. One is that it's a great tool, as we talked in one of our previous podcasts, about staying active in business development when you don't have a lot of time, or when your time is restricted to when you can do business development, because you could do things on LinkedIn virtually any time of the day. And the other one is it's a great tool for learning more about your clients and your prospects. You can, back to your original point about, it's a two-way communication. That listening part is very important. You can learn a lot about where your clients and your prospects are headed. And speaking of content, I mean, the most basic and most important part of content is to make sure you have a good profile on LinkedIn. Frankly, I find a lot of attorneys who aren't on LinkedIn, who should be on LinkedIn, they don't even know how to create a profile or to use the platform to their advantage. Or the other thing I find is that someone, created a profile on LinkedIn and they haven't updated it in years, which that is a mistake as well, because particularly for young attorneys who their career is progressing relatively quickly from having not a lot of experience to having some really substantive experience. If you don't update your profile on LinkedIn, you're going to look like a rookie lawyer, and when you aren't. I've been on a lot of prospect calls in my career, a lot of prospect meetings, and every time there's a new attorney mentioned, every single time without fail, the prospect or the client looks up that new attorney on LinkedIn to check them out. So it's something you have to keep it up to date so that it works well for you. Well, let's go back. Let's dig a little deeper in content, Toby. What makes a good LinkedIn post?
That's a very difficult question to answer, and you can look at it from a qualitative point of view. So a good LinkedIn post, I would say, keep coming back to that point, is one that is interesting for your target audiences to read. So it must be worth their time. So they are actually taking time to read through your content. So it needs something that adds value to their day. They should be a little smarter or happier or better off in general in life after reading your post. If you do that, then you've actually made an impression, and that will help your business development. That's the qualitative side of things, I would say. And then on a quantitative scale, you get all these metrics from LinkedIn. So you can look at a lot of different results. On the engagement side, you see how many likes you've created or received. You see how many comments, how many saves, how many people sent your post to someone else on LinkedIn. And even how many profile views a certain post has generated for you. And then on the other side, you see the impressions that the post received. So that's basically the reach you've created out of all these reactions that you got. obviously these impressions, they matter, and it used to be quite important how many likes and reactions you get. If someone liked your post, it was shown to someone from their network. And today the algorithm or LinkedIn has shifted a little bit away from giving a lot of value to these likes and reactions. So it's actually more the other forms of engagement that matter in terms of how far your posts are actually spread. So LinkedIn looks more at are users actually spending time on a post? Are they reading it? Are they really reading all the content? The more time they spend on a post, the better. Are they sending it to others, or are they even saving it for later? The consequence of that is that a lot of the likable stuff that used to be easily likable, like selfies or these conference drinks photos, they don't spread as far as they used to because they easily get likes. Whereas posts that are more in depth and longer to read, they don't generate as many likes, but will get more impressions these days.
Now, what drove that change by LinkedIn? Are they trying to be a more substantive platform? Are they trying to differentiate themselves from other social media outlets?
I think it's more of it moves a bit into a direction I think other social media platforms are also moving in. It used to be a social network where you could control who sees your content, whose content you see by connecting to people. So you saw content from your network. Then it moved to a more referral-based network where people liked stuff, and then that sort of moved the content into other networks from people that you're not already connected with. And now LinkedIn stronger emphasizes the topic of a content and your interest as a user. So they have an AI-driven platform who now really judges you as a user. What kind of content do you look at? What do you read? What do you write? What does your profile say? And then tries to match you to content that is interesting. So you're going to see more content from people that are not within your actual network, but to post stuff that is in your area of interest. And I think the idea there is, again, to make sure that people find interesting content. And it sounds like a good change, but effectively what is happening is that we are connected to a lot of people that are important to us business-wise. So we're connected to colleagues, we're connected to clients, and we want to see their content because that gives us an opportunity to engage with them. And now what has happened is that a lot of these people they just disappear from our newsfeed. And that generates the impression that they don't post anything or there is no content from them. So we miss out on a lot of stuff, and they miss out on a lot of our stuff as well. So business development wise, I think that's a change that we'll see how it will develop, but it's a big change.
So it's not as good a tool for listening in terms of understanding your clients and your prospects, perhaps, but is it still a good tool for business development?
Definitely. I mean, there are still things that we can do to make sure that that our posts are seen. Maybe going a step back in terms of what is a good post. I would encourage people not to get obsessed with these kind of numbers and key metrics that you get from LinkedIn. There are benchmark reports where organizations have analyzed 50,000 LinkedIn posts in 1 month and have determined, depending on how many followers you have, what is a good post, what is a top post, and what is a top 1% post. So there are these numbers, but I don't think you should compare yourself too much to the whole bunch, and it's all dependent on your own personal strategy and the target audience you have.
Well, yeah, in business development terms, the success isn't really how many followers you have or how many impressions you make. It's whether you make the right impressions about the right topics that line up with who the profile you're trying to portray. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, in the end, even the number of impressions, obviously a lot of people have seen your content, but we need to make sure that's the right people who see our content. And it's not the same thing. Obviously, within that target audience, we try, from the right people, we try to reach as many as possible. But the first goal needs to be to find the right ones.
Any other advice on what attorneys should do to maximize LinkedIn today?
Even though LinkedIn makes it a bit more difficult now to reach other people. I would still keep posting actively. Ideal would be once or twice a week. LinkedIn used to say it needs to be 3 to 5 times to maximize the outcome of your LinkedIn activity. That has changed. They say no more than 3 times, which for most lawyers isn't a problem. But if you post once a week or even twice a week, that would be great. Then when you're writing content, I would write it for real people. So think about real people who are actually reading it and not spend too much time worrying about what is the algorithm going to think and will it distribute my content, because if it's relevant and interesting, it will always win. Then, because of the recent changes on LinkedIn with this AI driven algorithm, I would focus on a couple of strategic areas. So don't post on one day about topic A and then about topic B. So have your business strategy ready and think about, okay, what it is that you want to be known for on this platform. Then another point would be to start commenting more on other posts, because LinkedIn has lowered the impressions for posts, but it has substantially increased the impressions that we get for good comments. If you're commenting, don't just comment, hey, that's a great point or interesting view. Add something of substance, add a new point of thought that matches the other one, or even something controversial, but not something that is just affirmative of what the person has already said. So it's the more interesting content, even in comments, that will win on that front. And then, as you said, keep the profile updated and focused as well, in order to make sure that LinkedIn properly understands what you're known for, and then engage with key people. So even the one-on-one networking on LinkedIn is not only about your own activity in terms of public activity, but also to connect with people, to message with people, send them something interesting that you've seen on LinkedIn. These kind of activities, they become more and more important as well.
So in essence, really what you're saying, Toby, is approach LinkedIn the same way you do any other business development activity, where you're trying to build a relationship, you're trying to build it on substance, you're trying to engage others in conversation, you're trying to provide some detail, make it real, make it line up exactly with who you want to be seen as professionally.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know why people always think just because they're on LinkedIn they have to behave in a different way. It's probably because a lot of people do, and then they see it, and it used to be easy to trick the algorithm with very, very weird hacks and get engagement for posts that were stupid and not interesting, and then they get frustrated and they think, okay, if I don't like this, then if I post here as well, then people will think that of my content. But that's absolutely not the case. If you post interesting stuff, then people will appreciate it. And there's no reason to behave differently on LinkedIn than you would anywhere else. You don't need a networking policy for your lawyers, right? It's weird that you need one for social media.
Well, I mean, you need one for social media because people make mistakes. People don't think about it as, going back to your original point at the very start of the podcast about how it is real life and you need to treat it the same as you would any other networking situation. But, we've run into some examples where people have used social media in a way that they didn't use common sense. And that has kind of backfired on them.
Do you have an example for a situation where it backfired?
Sure. One was there was an attorney made a negative comment about the strategy employed in a case involving the subsidiary of a client. Well, he didn't understand that was the subsidiary of a client. He didn't run a conflict check before commenting on the matter, the case that was posted, and when we heard about it from the client, that didn't work out so well for us. In another instance, we had a judge had made a ruling in a highly politicized case that was contrary to this attorney's personal view, and he kind of went on a rant on LinkedIn against the judge. This was a matter we weren't even involved in, and that blew up in his face as well. So, back to your point, it is real world. You need to treat it the same way you would if you were standing in a room of people where you want to, be polite and present the best version of yourself.
Interesting. So maybe one final comment about the recent changes on LinkedIn, because it is quite scary if you have been using LinkedIn as a business development method, I think what you're seeing now is that LinkedIn is sort of a gatekeeper between you and your target audiences. So here we are on a platform where suddenly LinkedIn can change the rules of the game, and then they decide whether somebody sees your content or not. I would still recommend lawyers to use LinkedIn. It's an essential tool for business development and for relationship management, but make sure that you also focus on those channels where you actually control access to your target audiences. So don't build a whole business on a social media platform where things can change so quickly. Then you're dependent, and that's not a good place to be.
So we've talked a lot about, over these episodes, we've talked a lot about personal branding and personal marketing. And in this episode, we focused on LinkedIn. And one of the points that I made was that, when you're on LinkedIn, you're reflecting your firm's brand, your firm's approach to the world. So kind of makes sense that maybe in our next episode, we drill down a little bit on how attorneys can maximize the branding and marketing promotional efforts that their firms put forth to advance their own careers.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. That was a good discussion on how lawyers can use LinkedIn for business development. I look forward to speaking to you next time, Bill.
I learned a lot, and I can continue to be one of the cool kids with you, Toby.